So yesterday, as I'm sure pretty much all of you are aware by now because it's all over the place, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list for the TCG format dropped, and it goes into effect on Monday, January 20th. And as you guys can see by this picture that TCGplayer.com put together, there are a ton of changes. I mean, this is one of the biggest ban lists we've ever had. There's so many banned cards and limited cards and a couple semi-limited, but a whole bunch of unlimited cards. This is just a really crazy time. It's an awesome ban list, and it will really change the game for the better, at least in my opinion. Also, just wanted to mention, I'm sure you guys have heard this before, but if you are buying cards for the new ban list, like if you bought a new deck or you're buying new cards as tech choices, whatever it may be, please use that link to TCG Player in the description below. A portion of all of the sales done after clicking that link go right back into this channel, so it's a great way to support me without spending any extra money and just buying whatever cards you normally would be buying, but clicking that link first. Anyway, for today's video, I want to go over 5 decks that were definitely nerfed by this most recent ban list and kind of talk about what they lost and if they could still be playable in this upcoming format. I know that for some other channels, when a ban list dropped, and I feel like this is a majority of people, but they like doing those videos where they predict what the top strategies will be over the course of the next few months or next few weeks. I'm not really a big fan of that. I feel that there are way too many variables for me to know on the first or second day which decks are going to be the top strategies. For me personally, I'd rather just talk about which decks took hits and which decks got better in a more general sense over the course of the next couple days. First up, let's talk about Thunder Dragons now that Colossus is banned. So there are multiple variants of Thunder Dragon decks. You have the pure variants, then you have a variety of different combo variants. You have Dinosaur Thunder, but I mostly want to focus on Pure Thunder for the beginning because Pure Thunder, in my opinion, is just completely dead. Now, I might be proven wrong, but I really don't think it's possible to play a Pure Thunder Dragon deck, and I want to explain why. So obviously Colossus is very strong, but so is Titan. So some players might say, well, it'll just be fine just playing Titan, that's perfectly acceptable. And in a vacuum, at least this last format, Colossus and Titan, they were about on the same level. You know, Colossus against Orcas especially wasn't very good. They did not have that many search effects. Mostly Orcas is just doing stuff by banishing cards in the graveyard to special summon monsters or send monsters, not so much searching, so Colossus wasn't very good. So in general, when the Thunder Dragon player was playing, they were trying to end on both Colossus and Titan because Titan was the main form of interruption. So you might be thinking, well, okay, Pure Thunder, they just won't play Colossus. It already wasn't that good. Now they'll just play Titan and be fine. But the problem is that Colossus was like the easiest way to summon Titan. So even though Colossus maybe isn't as important, it still was a very crucial stepping stone. Because Titan, you can still summon it. You can summon it off Thunder Dragon Fusion. You can play Instant Fusion, and if you draw that, you can banish the Kaminari attack. But most of the time, at least for the first Titan, you would summon it with its own summoning condition of banishing a Thunder monster from your hand and a Thunder Fusion monster that you control, which usually was Colossus. Pure Thunder already was not the most consistent strategy, so I really feel without Colossus as a stepping stone and a boss monster, it'll be really lacking in the upcoming weeks. It makes sense that Colossus took a hit. It probably would have been really overpowered in Master Rule 5 format, and if there would have been one more ban list before Master Rule 5, the card probably could have stayed at the 1 or 2 copies, but because the no sooner than date is March 30th, which is right before Master Rule 5, it makes sense that Colossus would get the axe, even if banning it might have been taking it one step too far. But what about the combo decks? Well, the combo Thunder decks, the decks that are teching a small Thunder engine, I feel those ones are actually pretty okay, just because those decks didn't care so much about the Colossus, they more just cared about getting advantage off of their banishing effects, whether it's Dinosaurs or Chaos Dragon Levianeer or the baby Chaos Dragons. They didn't care so much about the Colossus itself, but just banishing cards and making sure that they got those searches and those special summons. That was really valuable for those decks. So if those decks still exist, which I think they probably will, even with a lot of the combo cards banned, I still think that those decks will exist and they will probably still play Thunder if they can find the room. Next up, let's talk about Salomon Great, and this one was pretty much out of left field for me personally. When I saw that Mirage Stalio was banned, that was super surprising because while Salomon Great certainly has been a top tier strategy over the past couple formats, that hit just seemed really rough. Like, it really makes the deck almost unplayable, and I've talked to some of the better Salomon Great players in the game and they seem to still have some hope for the strategy, but for the average Salomon Great player, a deck that was already on the decline over the past couple weeks especially, I'm just not really feeling it. You know, I've played a couple matches already with new Salomon Greats, I've looked at a few different builds, and it just does not feel as consistent or as powerful or as versatile as it once was. Salomon Great at this point feels like an Abyss Dweller turbo strategy, but if you're gonna do that, you might as well just play like Lunalight or something along those lines. I'm really just not seeing where Salomon Great would fall in the upcoming meta without Mirage Stallios. Certainly it does still have some really powerful cards and some pretty good inevitability, but the main opening combo just isn't there. I will say, to me at least, it is really good that they added Lady Debug back at 3 copies per deck. I'm pretty sure that Gazelle to 2 or Circle to 2 would have been more impactful because Debug is super susceptible to hand traps, but at least it's something kind of small at least to make up for the loss of one of their best extra deck options. Next up we have Pendulums, and I do want to add sort of a small sort of note here, and that's that at the time of filming this video, I know that Triff Gaming, one of the most outspoken Pendulum players in the entire community, if not the most outspoken Pendulum players in the entire community, he is currently at a regional. This is not a new format regional, but he is playing new format Pendulums, and at the moment of recording, he is currently 4-1 against the current decks. Now, because I can't see into the future, I don't know how good he actually ended up doing, but right now he's starting off pretty well. I think that's pretty promising. However, Pendulums definitely did get nerfed with this ban list, and that's kind of why at the beginning I mentioned that I'm not just talking about decks that I feel are going to be really bad or decks that I feel are really going to be good. I'm just talking about which decks in this video at least got nerfed, and Pendulums definitely did get nerfed. Losing Heavy Metal Foes Electromite is huge. That was one of the best Link monsters pretty much ever released for a mechanic like this. It is very similar to Needle Fiber, whatever the new name is that no one can pronounce, that's coming out in a few months, but for Pendulum monsters instead of Synchro monsters, which obviously has been a top contender for a long time. But it wasn't just Electromite, because if just Electromite got banned, you could probably switch to like a pure Endymion version. Maybe that's the version people are playing anyways, but also Servant got limited. Servant of Endymion, one of the best cards in the entire Pendulum main deck. You lost 2 copies of that, and even though it is still searchable, it always was like the best card to open in a Pendulum deck, at least in most of them, so losing those 2 copies hurts a lot, and that might even hurt more than the Electromite getting banned. I don't claim to be an expert Pendulum player, but in pretty much every single Pendulum deck profile I've seen, they say that Servant is like the best card, so I'm assuming that losing 2 copies of your best card definitely hurts, even if it doesn't kill the deck. I would know that. I lost 2 copies of Multifaker a while ago, and even though the deck is still good, it definitely is harder to play with just 1 copy. That might be pretty similar to what Pendulum players are feeling right now in terms of Servant of Endymion. I will say among the Pendulum community, not just Triff Gaming, but so many really top players like Paul Cooper had topped like 10 regionals in a row with Pendulums. I think that that community in particular is really creative and sort of finding new ways to play their favorite strategy, so I wouldn't count Pendulums out yet, but they might get less popular, and it certainly will be harder to play the deck even if the deck isn't dead. Next up we have True Dracos, and yes, before you say it, I am well aware that I am pretty salty towards this deck. I have been in the past, and I can't really change that. What can I say? I do not like playing against this deck. I think a lot of people don't like playing against this deck, and it took 2 pretty large hits on this recent ban list. So while it didn't get any cards banned, which makes sense because it's a rogue strategy, it did get 2 cards limited. Cardinamize and Dragonic Diagram, alongside, if you remember, Terraforming being limited, means this deck is a lot less consistent. Nothing felt worse than 1-for-1 trading through all of your opponent's back row and all of your opponent's monsters and popping the diagram, only to have them top deck Cardinamize into Terraforming, into Diagram, into Heritage, into Disciples, and drawing all of their deck after you destroyed all of their cards. That really sucks. I think Konami realizes that with banning all of these meta strategies like Salomon Greats, like Sky Strikers, like Orcas, like Thunder Dragons, hitting all of those decks but leaving True Draco untouched would be a very bad idea. Despite having so many search cards and so many draw cards, the deck already wasn't the most consistent strategy. Oftentimes you would draw mismatched hands or have too many monsters or too few monsters. There were a lot of cases, even with triple Cardinamize and triple Diagram, and even when there was more copies of Terraforming, that a player would just set 5 and pass, not really drawing a monster card for several turns or a way to get to a monster card. And now that Cardinamize is limited and Dragonic Diagram is limited and Terraforming is limited, it's going to be really tough, and those hands are going to happen more often than they would in the past. This is especially painful for the True Draco deck because more so than other decks needs to draw a very specific hand to even have a chance of winning the game. You need to draw a pretty specific ratio of 1 or 2 monster cards maybe, and then Diagram and maybe a Heritage or a Disciples, and then a couple Floodgates. You need to establish those Floodgates on the very first turn because your deck doesn't have a lot of comeback mechanisms against the other strategies. Sure, you have these sort of spells and traps popping back row and monster cards, but in general, a true Draco deck won more often than not when it could establish a field and a floodgate or two on the very first turn. Now that Diagram is limited and Card Demise is limited, it's going to be even harder to do that, so I can't imagine too many players wanting to play true Draco after this most recent ban list. I've seen a lot of comments from true Draco players already, and it seems like to me that a lot of them are switching to decks like Altergeist or Guru Control, which are just more consistent, and in the case of Guru Control can play many of the same floodgates that true Draco were already using. Before I get to my number one pick for which deck I feel lost the most off of this ban list, I want to say Orcas, and this is going to be an honorable mention. It might sound weird because yes, they lost Harp and that is one of their best monster cards, but I'm pretty sure, and it seems like a lot of people are pretty sure, that Orcas is still going to be one of, if not the best deck going forward. Losing Harp definitely hurts, but Orcas has gotten so many cards banned. I've talked about that before. They've gotten, like, at this point, what, 5 cards banned or 6 cards banned, depending on which cards you actually consider. If you consider Azthoth an Orcas card these days, I know it used to be played in them, but not too much anymore. But still, regardless, Orcas have hit a lot of cards, and they've gotten a lot of cards banned specifically, and they still manage to be around. You can still do a lot of the combos. It's not as consistent, you need more extenders, but many of these same combos that we've been playing against for a long time now are still technically usable, just a little bit harder to pull off. We don't know for sure how good Orcas will be in the upcoming format, especially after Ignition Assault releases, but it seems like it's still going to be pretty consistent, and until a new really powerful deck gets released, which still really isn't on the horizon, Orcas might be like the go-to number one strategy, even with one of their best cards banned, just because there really aren't that many other decks out there right now, not many new archetypes coming out right now at least, that can really compete even with Orcas after banning so many cards. And at number one, if you haven't guessed it already, it's Sky Strikers. And yes, I know that is a meme on Simo's channel, not my channel, but man does it feel good to say that Sky Strikers have been hit significantly enough on a ban list to not be one of the top strategies anymore, and in fact almost unplayable under this new ban list. Sure, they got back 2 copies of Kagari, and maybe someone will be crazy enough to make that work without Engage, but Engage is banned. Thank God, we have been waiting so long for this, and I couldn't be happier. I'm not so sure that Sky Strikers are completely out of the metagame. You know, they still have a lot of really powerful interactions. Kagari and Shizuku and Rei are really good at digging through the deck, but I think at this point it's pretty safe to say that in general, pure Sky Striker, very similar to pure Thunder Dragon, is just completely dead. Someone might top something with it, but I really doubt without Engage and with most of the other powerful cards still limited, like Hornet Drones, like Multi-Roll, like Widow Anchor, like all those other cards, I still think it's going to be really difficult even with those extra 2 copies of Kagari. Maybe someone can build like an anti-meta version of Sky Strikers, and maybe that can be pretty viable, but in general, I think we've seen the last of Sky Strikers at least for a little bit. Now, sure, people might still want to tech Hornet Drones, you know, it still is a 1-card link too, and I guess that's pretty cool, but I really doubt people will want to do that without the copies of Engage. A lot of people didn't just play Hornet Drones because it was so good, but because they could have those copies of Engage in their deck to sort of just randomly draw one and win the game off of that advantage. And I haven't seen a lot of these comments, but I have seen a couple comments from people, and I don't know if they're actually going to tournaments, but I always get those pessimistic people in the comments that say things like, oh, I don't know why people are rejoicing because they just hit Sky Strikers and Thunder Dragons and all these meta decks that you guys will buy new cards. You're all just meta sheep and you're just following Konami and what they tell you to buy. But I think in general, most of the player base has been asking for many of these hits, maybe even more hits to decks like Orcas for quite a while. It feels like we've been getting Engaged for almost 2 years. I mean, it's been like a little bit over a year and a half now because I think Engage came out in May of 2018. So it's been a while since that card was released, and it's still at 3 copies per deck, at least for the next couple days. I can't say specifically why I feel this way or why other people feel this way, but something about Engage and watching your opponent resolve multiples of those in a turn and searching cards and drawing cards just doesn't feel right. I feel like that card always should have been a hard once per turn, or at least the draw should have been a hard once per turn. I'm not really sure, but at least for right now, for the next couple formats, hopefully we won't have to deal with Engage, which will be super great. I really want to give a huge shout out to Konami for this ban list. It is fantastic, and I know I might sound biased as an Altergeist player, but just for the overall health of the game, I feel this list helps so many different areas for so many different decks while also giving us some older cards back. It truly is one of the biggest and best ban lists we've ever seen seen in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Make sure to use my link to tcplayer.com if you want to buy any cards because of the ban list, like I said at the beginning. I'll see you in the next video though. Goodbye.